Hello everyone and welcome to Metagame Mastery, coming to you today with the Dominaria Limited Archetype History class. If you enjoy our content, please remember to like, share, and subscribe. Without further ado, big time! Go time! Let's go! First up, we're going to look at possibly the most powerful card for this build. It's Wrath Capuchin, Ship's Mage. Use 4 CMC, 2 colorless, white blue for a 3/3 legendary human wizard with flash, flying, and you may cast historic spells as though they had flash. Very, very powerful in a deck that we're building around historic spell triggers. So this guy's going to do a whole lot for us, and he's just straight value, being a 3/3 for 4 mana with 2 keywords. Just awesome card for this deck. Artificer's Assistant is 1 blue mana for a 1/1 flying bird, and whenever you cast a historic spell, you may scry 1. This is awesome, being able to deal damage early in the air. Typically, you 1/1 flyers for 1, you call them lava axes because they're going to get you at least 5 damage over the course of the game. And on top of that, you can get the incidental value, even when it's no longer relevant for combat. You get the incidental value of being able to get that additional card selection every time you cast a historic spell. Very powerful in this build. Sarah Disciple is 2 CMC, 1 colorless, and a white for a 1/1 flying first strike bird cleric. Whenever you cast a historic spell, Sarah Disciple gets +1/+1 until end of turn. So this is really dependent on you having enough historic spells to make this guy viable. You typically want to be able to cast multiple spells in a turn, but as you'll see, many of our historic spells are going to be a little bit more expensive. So this guy has the potential to push through a good chunk of damage for you, but isn't nearly as good as your Artificer's Assistant. Benelish Honor Guard is 2 CMC, 1 colorless, and a white for a 2/2 human knight. He gets +1/+0 for each legendary creature you control. This archetype is the most supported archetype in the entire format. There's a ton of artifacts. There's obviously several sagas for you to choose from, and every single pack will come with a legendary card in it. It's also going to be the highest variance archetype in the format because so many of these cards are going to be at a higher rarity. Yes, many of the artifacts are going to be at common and uncommon, and even some of the legendaries will be at uncommon, but you can't count on getting all of those. So the value of this card will vary based on what legends you draw into your card pool. Relic Hunter is 2 CMC, 1 colorless, and a blue for a 2/1 human rogue. Relic Hunter can't be blocked if you've cast a historic spell this turn. This is awesome. Just being able to push through even more damage every time we drop an artifact. The Avenant Trapper is 3 CMC, 2 colorless, and a white for a 3/2 human archer. Whenever you cast a historic spell, tap target creature an opponent controls. This card is actually potentially very powerful. If you have enough historic spells to trigger her reliably, she can really mess with an opponent's combat math, making her an absolute threat every single turn. Sanctum Spirit is 4 CMC, 3 colorless, and a white for a 3/2 spirit with a lifelink. At any time you can discard a historic card, and Sanctum Spirit is indestructible until end of turn. So this is deceptively powerful. 3/2 with lifelink is going to produce some pretty big life swings on its own, but the ability to discard any artifact, legend, or saga from your hand, especially ones that are necessarily no longer relevant or you don't have the mana for, and give it indestructible, really helps this avoid removal, combat tricks, and your opponent's going to typically play around it as though it has indestructible all the time. Just having that threat makes it so that your opponent's going to treat it like it's indestructible, as long as you have a card in your hand. Daring Archaeologist is 4 CMC, 3 colorless, and a white for a 3/3 human artificer. When it enters the battlefield, you may return target artifact card from your graveyard to your hand. Whenever you cast a historic spell, put a +1/+1 counter on Daring Archaeologist. This card is sweet. I've heard a lot of people ragging on it. I think they just don't get it. It's a 3/3 for 4. Yeah, that's not great on its own, but you're getting a artifact card back from your graveyard, which you can cast next turn to get a historic trigger. Then it can attack in for a 4/4 for 4, and you're triggering all your other abilities on the board. That's a lot of value. And then every time you trigger a historic ability from that point forward, it just gets bigger and bigger and bigger over time. Granted, you have to play it in this specific archetype, but if you draw into it in your card pool, this guy's going to get nuts. Sentinel of the Pearl Trident is 5 CMC, 4 colorless, and a blue for a 3/3 Merfolk Soldier with Flash. When he enters the battlefield, you may exile target historic permanent you control. If you do, return that card to the battlefield under its owner control at the beginning of the next end step. Very important to protect your legends more than anything, or your higher cost artifacts. Either way, this is awesome card. Also, a ton of value you can get by flashing in and out sagas. Excavation Elephant is 5 CMC, 4 colorless, and a white for a 3/5 elephant with kicker 1 colorless and a white. When he enters the battlefield, if he was kicked, return target artifact from your graveyard to your hand. Just a great way for you to get recurring value and draw into some gas so that you can continue triggering your historic triggers. Now, mind you, typically you don't even want to run this in draft, but in your sealed pool, maybe for a pre-release, this is actually worth considering as both curve filler and some late game gas. Now for our historic cards. The most reliable cards you're going to get are the artifacts, and you want to get them cheap and get some significant benefit out of them. For example, Spartan Construct is 1 colorless mana for a 1/1 artifact creature construct, and when he dies, you put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control. So he's cheap to get into play, triggering your historic abilities, but at the same time, if anything happens to him, he's very fragile, he dies very easy, you can still get that recurring value permanently pumping up another creature you have on the board. Very solid choice for this strategy. Blood Tallow Candle is 1 colorless mana for an artifact. You can pay 6, tap it, and sacrifice it. Target creature gets -5/-5 until end of turn. Very powerful. Cheap, easy historic trigger for your deck, but later in the game, it turns into a removal spell. So either way, you're getting a lot of value out of this card in this strategy. Navigator's Compass is 1 colorless mana for an artifact. When it enters the battlefield, you gain 3 life. You can also tap it until end of turn. Target land you control becomes a basic land type of your choice in addition to its other types. Cheap historic trigger, get life gain immediately, and it's mana fixing from that point forward. I still hate its flavor text. I still hate it. I'm going to go full on The Last Jedi on this and be so mad that I was all stoked that the Weatherlight crew could like replace the Gatewatch as the main protagonist in the story arc for a while, but no, they just had to go and ruin my fan fiction. Otherwise, it's a good card for this strategy. Mox Amber reaches its godlike potential in this strategy. It's 0 cost, legendary artifact, hits all your historic triggers for a whole lot of no mana, and you can tap it to add 1 mana of any color among legendary creatures and planeswalkers you control. Perfect for this strategy. Voltaic Construct is 2 colorless mana for a 1/3 artifact creature construct. At the beginning of your end step, untap target artifact, getting you an absolute ton of value. Untapping your mana rocks so that you can hold up mana for flash spells, for control spells, and it works perfectly with Traxxas Scourge of Krug. It's freaking Grimlock in Magic. Not the Hascon promo Grimlock, but look at this guy. He looks like freaking Grimlock. He's 4 colorless mana for 7/7 legendary artifact creature construct with trample. He enters the battlefield tapped. It doesn't untap during your untap step. Whenever you cast a historic spell, untap Traxxas. So this is super, super good in this strategy. Just being able to attack early and often, very aggressively. And with Voltaic Construct, you can attack with him and untap him at the end of turn so that he can be held up as a blocker as well. Awesome, awesome power in this deck. Blackblade Reforged is 2 colorless mana for legendary artifact equipment with equip cost of 7, or equipped to a legendary creature for only 3. Equipped creature gets +1/+1 for each land you control. So right now we've seen a whole 2 legendary creatures. There will be more. This set is just going to be absolutely stacked with legends. Aether Glider is 3 CMC for a 2/1 artifact creature bird construct with flying, and it cannot block. So there's a whole lot of downside to this card. You're basically playing off curve. What I like about it and why it's absolutely viable in this strategy, especially in sealed, where you're going to have a very limited card pool, is that it gets you your historic triggers and it can push through evasive damage in the air. So this deck is going to be very aggressive. It's going to be blue-white Flyers deck, and this guy fits in perfectly. Powerstone Shard is 3 colorless mana for an artifact. You can tap it, add 1 colorless for each artifact named Powerstone Shard that you have in play. So this is just a way for you to get your historic triggers and get some mana ramp so that you can continue dropping your cheap artifacts in play and play on curve. Skittering Surveyor is 3 colorless mana for a 1/2 artifact creature construct. When it enters the battlefield, you may search your library for a basic land card, reveal it, put it into your hand, and shuffle your library. I really like this guy not only as a historic trigger, but as potential mana fixing, allowing you to splash an additional color in here. There are a couple different ways that you might want to splash colors in this deck, and this guy allows you the flexibility to do so. Urza's Tome is 2 colorless mana for an artifact. You can pay 3 colorless, tap it, draw a card, then discard a card unless you exile a historic card from your graveyard. So in this, typically it's looting, like repeatable looting effect. But in this strategy, it can be turned into straight up repeatable card advantage. That's very powerful. I like this card a lot for this strategy. Amaranthine Wall is 4 CMC for a 0/6 artifact creature wall with Defender. You can pay 2 colorless mana, and it gains indestructible until end of turn. So this is great for slowing down the game, stopping your opponent from crashing into you with its bigger threats. And the indestructible ability not only helps it dodge removal, but makes it so that it can continue doing so even in the late game when they get some really big creatures. Awesome card to slow down the game. Joyrus Familiar is 4 CMC for a 2/2 artifact creature bird with flying. Historic spells cost you 1 colorless less to cast. This is also a really solid mana ramp because the majority of the spells in your deck will be historic, allowing you to cast multiples in a single turn. Icy Manipulator is 4 colorless mana for an artifact. You can pay 1 colorless, tap it to tap target artifact, creature, or land. Now, I wouldn't run this in draft, but say you're playing in your pre-release, you've got a sealed pool, and you're thinking of going historic matters. Well, this is actually going to do a ton of work for you in that circumstance. Give it a try. I think you'll be pleasantly surprised at just how versatile this card becomes. If you happen to be lucky enough to draw into it, the Weatherlight is absolutely epic in this strategy. It's 4 colorless mana for a 4/5 legendary artifact vehicle. It has flying, and when it deals a crew cost of 3, and when it deals combat damage to a player, look at the top 5 cards of your library. You may reveal a historic card from among them and put it into your hand. Put the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. This is repeatable card advantage, and it allows you to continue pushing through damage in the air, which is everything this strategy wants to do. It is absolutely perfect. If you don't draw into a Weatherlight, the Weatherlight Light version, Board the Weatherlight, is absolutely a great value card for this strategy. It's 1 colorless and a white for a sorcery. Look at the top 5 cards of your library. You may reveal a historic card from among them and put it into your hand. Put the rest on the bottom of your library in random order. Just giving you that additional card selection is super powerful. And in this particular strategy, you will very rarely miss with this. This is a very good addition to this deck. Gilded Lotus is super powerful in this strategy. It's 5 colorless mana for an artifact. You can tap it for 3 mana of any one color. So not only is it going to give you a historic trigger, but you can immediately tap it for 3 mana to put another creature in play, maybe get another historic trigger on the same turn. Very powerful card. Also allowing you to play multiple spells per turn and stay on curve throughout the rest of the game. Juggernaut is 4 colorless mana for a 5/3 artifact creature Juggernaut. It attacks each combat if able, and Juggernaut can't be blocked by walls. So this card is awesome in this strategy. Not only getting you a historic trigger, but attacking very aggressively for high damage. Also, it pairs well with Deep Freeze is 3 CMC, 2 colorless and a blue for an enchantment or enchanted creature, has base power toughness 0/4, has defender, loses all other abilities, and is a blue wall in addition to its other colors and types. Very powerful removal in this format, and especially in this deck, because even though it's a wall, it can't block Juggernaut, making for a very powerful 1/2 punch. Guardians of Koilos is 5 colorless mana for a 4/4 artifact creature construct. When it enters the battlefield, you may return another target historic permanent you control to its owner's hand. Just a great way for you to get your historic trigger for 1 turn and have a historic trigger in your back pocket for the next turn. Very powerful. Hardic Wanderer is 6 colorless mana for a 5/5 artifact creature golem who has trample. So this is just a way for you to have a late game option in case you don't already have one, and at the same time trigger your historic abilities. Thran Temporal Gateway is a super powerful card, but it's a bit of a nombo in the strategy, and I'll explain why in a minute. It's 4 colorless mana for a legendary artifact. You could pay 4 colorless, tap it. You may put a historic permanent card from your hand onto the battlefield. So being able to cheat stuff into play at instant speed is very powerful. This is a very good card. But most of our abilities trigger on the cast of a historic spell, and this does not cast those spells. So in that regard, it may not be the best fit for this deck. It really depends on how many historic spells you draw that are high cost or off color. Sage of Latnam is a great way for us to convert those artifacts we dropped early that maybe aren't relevant anymore into gas late game. It's 2 CMC, 1 colorless and a blue for a 1/2 human artificer. You can tap him, sacrifice an artifact to draw a card. And Curator's Ward is actually decent in this deck. It's 3 CMC, 2 colorless, and a blue for an enchantment aura, enchant permanent. So this can go on one of our artifacts. This can go on a saga. It can even go on our legendary creatures or our regular creatures. Enchanted creature has hexproof, and when this permanent leaves the battlefield, if it was historic, draw 2 cards. Awesome for you to put on sagas when they eventually blow themselves up. You get to replace them and the curator's ward. Also a great way to protect very powerful legendaries that you have or artifacts that you're relying on the abilities for. Baird, Steward of Argive, is 4 CMC, 2 colorless, white for a 2/4 legendary human soldier with vigilance. Creatures can't attack you or a planeswalker you control unless their controller pays 1 colorless for each of those creatures. So he's a mini pillow fort, but he's also a big butt vigilance creature, which is very important because he's able to block effectively for whatever few creatures they are able to send through. And there are a lot of go wide strategies in this format. This guy is great protection, keeps you from being overwhelmed early. Tishar, Ancestors Apost, is 4 CMC, 3 colorless, and a white for a 2/2 legendary bird cleric with flying. Whenever you cast a historic spell, return target creature with converted mana cost 3 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. Wow, that's good. In this strategy, this is almost as good as a Sun Titan. This is very powerful and definitely worth running. Zahad, Jinn of the Lamp, is 6 CMC, 4 colorless, blue for a 5/6 legendary Jinn with flying. You may pay 3 colorless and a blue and tap an untapped artifact you control rather than pay this spell's mana cost, making him very aggressive play in this deck. You have one of your 1-drop artifacts in play. Go ahead, tap it, drop this guy on turn 4. Pushing through 5 damage in the air is very, very powerful in this format. The Antiquities War is 4 CMC, 3 colorless, and a blue for an enchantment saga. On the first 2 lore counters, you look at the top 5 cards of your library. You may reveal an artifact card from among them and put it into your hand. Put the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. And then on the 3rd lore counter, artifacts you control become artifact creatures with base power and toughness 5/5 until end of turn. Gosh darn, that's a beastie. In this deck, you will very consistently hit those card advantage counters. And then when you finish them off, you should have a ton of artifacts on board. Go ahead and wipe them out with an army of 5/5s. Way powerful card. Tragic Poet is a great way for you to get additional value off of your sagas. It's 1 white mana for a 1/1 human, and you can tap it, sack it, return target enchantment card from your graveyard to your hand. So you run this guy, and once your sagas have gone off, or if they're killed prematurely, you can just bring them right back into your hand, get that additional historic trigger from playing it, and the value from being able to play it all over again. Now, I mentioned before that you might want to splash colors, and Joyra is the best reason to do so. She's 4 CMC, 2 colorless, blue-red for a 3/3 legendary human artificer. Whenever you cast a historic spell, draw a card. Gosh darn. In this deck, that's just throwing kerosene on the fire. Absolutely worth splashing red for. If you draw this, it's a no-brainer. Windmill slam. And Karn, Scion of Urza, is going to feel right at home in this deck as well. He's 4 colorless mana for a legendary planeswalker with a starting loyalty of 5. You can +1 him to reveal the top 2 cards of your library. An opponent chooses one of them, put that card into your hand, and exile the other with a silver counter on it. You can -1 him to put a card you own with a silver counter on it from exile into your hand. And you can -2 him to create a 0/0 colorless construct artifact creature token with this creature gets +1/+1 for each artifact you control. Very, very powerful card in this strategy. You're going to have a ton of artifacts, and getting that additional card advantage cannot be understated just how powerful he is. Teferi Hero Dominaria fits right into this strategy as well. He's 5 CMC, 3 colorless, white blue for a legendary planeswalker with starting loyalty of 4. You can +1 him to draw a card at the beginning of your next end step, untap 2 lands. You can -3 him to put target non-land permanent into its owner's library, third from the top. And if you manage to get 8 loyalty, you can do his ultimate, which you get an emblem whenever you draw a card, exile target permanent and opponent controls. Super powerful, fits right into this strategy. Awesome card if you manage to draw it. Oath of Teferi also works. It's 5 CMC, 3 colorless, white blue for a legendary enchantment. When it enters the battlefield, exile another target permanent you control, return it to the battlefield under its owner's control at the beginning of the next end step. You may activate the loyalty abilities on planeswalkers you control twice each turn rather than only once. Very powerful in this strategy, just being able to flicker something back into play, get that additional enter the battlefield trigger, and on top of all that, it's also a historic card on its own. Lyra Dawnbringer is one of the most powerful bombs in the format. She's 5 CMC, 3 colorless, white for a 5/5 legendary angel with flying, first strike, and lifelink. Other angels you control get +1/+1 and have lifelink. If you see her, you play her, and she's especially awesome in this strategy, not only getting you value as a creature, as a lord, but triggering your historic abilities. Urza's Ruinous Blast is 5 CMC, 4 colorless and a white for a legendary sorcery. Exile all non-land permanents that aren't legendary. You're going to love legendaries in this strategy. Absolutely worth running. One-sided board wipe more often than not. Karn's Temporal Sundering is going to go off more consistently in this strategy than any other. It's 6 CMC, 4 colorless, blue for a legendary sorcery. Target player takes an extra turn after this one. Return up to 1 target non-land permanent to its owner's hand. Exile Karn's Temporal Sundering. And In Bolas's Clutches is a very powerful removal spell in any blue deck, but it's especially good in this strategy because it is a historic spell on its own. It's 6 CMC, 4 colorless, blue for a legendary enchantment aura. Enchant permanent. You control enchanted permanent. Enchanted permanent is legendary. Very powerful. And lastly, I wanted to touch on another very good reason for you to splash colors in this strategy. Primeval's Glorious Rebirth is 7 CMC, 5 colorless, white-black, legendary sorcery. Return all legendary permanent cards from your graveyard to the battlefield. This has the potential to absolutely blow out a game. It's definitely worth splashing 1 swamp in this strategy. Very, very good stuff. Well, that's it for our Dominaria limited archetype videos. While there are technically Selesnya and Rakdos archetype, they tend to be just 2-color good stuff, so I'm not going to be making a video about them. But if you do enjoy this content, please remember to like, share, and subscribe. This has been Metagame Mastery. Peace!